Oh, it's from the side. How come we can't see Sarah?
That's a good thing.
I'm about to move it around.
No!
You gotta record it. Want to see Sarah?
Oh, what's wrong with
That's so weird. It's like
I thought you were gonna like throw it up.
Like that.
All right.
Try to kick it up and catch it.
Okay. 6.1. We got to get through 6.1 today. So.
You always do it.
No, I don't.
Are you recording?
Do this. Yes, I am.
Oh.
Because Cole wasn't here during class earlier today.
Giving
And
me.
So that
I
whole
record
class.
for Maddie too. Yeah, no.
Wait a
That whole
minute.
class
It's like a free class.
party.
Ellen, you were hitting that. I thought someone was at the door.
Just new. Let's get
There's even more behind. Okay.
So I should
6.1. Nervous system. It's one of my favorite units, I think, of the year, even though it's one of the hardest, if not the hardest. It's really interesting. I think the brain is interesting. All right, so we're going to look at how the nervous system is organized today and kind of just the specific parts. We're going to talk about neurons, neuron parts, etc. So organization, there's two major divisions. We'll talk about all of this good stuff as we go through. All right, so the two major divisions of the nervous system are the CNS and the PNS. CNS is for central nervous system, okay, which would include what?
Your brain.
Brain and
Your spinal cord.
okay. So, brain and spinal cord. Okay, P and S stands for peripheral nervous system. So it will be to your benefit, I think, to do this also. So you got your central nervous system, all right, and you have your peripheral. What does peripheral mean?
On the outside.
Yeah, so you got your peripheral vision, right? Down here, so that's one easy way to remember which one is which. So this is brain and spinal cord. I didn't really leave myself enough room there, but this one it splits up and then splits up again. So we'll talk about that as we go. All right, so your peripheral nervous system, again, kind of the nerves to the outside. So if you're looking at that spinal column back there, you think about your spinal cord itself, which runs in between or runs through those vertebrae, is that's the hole at the base of the skull. Wait, what?
What?
I'm talking about through the middle of the vertebrae, right through here. But these are spinal nerves, and those are part of the peripheral nervous system. That's kind of where it starts. Okay. So sensory receptors, which would be what? What would they do?
They reset.
I bet say isn't receptors like they're the ones to tell us what's going on?
Yeah, that's the one that picks up the stimulus, right? It's like your senses, okay, receives stimulus. Afferent nerves are your sensory nerves. Receptors are just what picks it up. We talked about some of that when we talked about the integumentary system. Remember, we saw some like the touch receptors and pressure receptors, pain receptors. I talked about that a little bit. Okay, everybody remember talking about afferent versus efferent at the very beginning of the year? A goes before E.
Yep.
So afferent goes away from the stimulus, remember, back towards the brain. Okay. Efferent are your motor nerves. Motor means move. Okay, so those are the nerves that go back to your muscles from your central nervous system that tell it to contract. Okay. Motor, move, muscle. All those, motor, move, muscle. Efferent puts forth effort, right? Like your muscles put forth effort. So E for efferent, E for effort. Okay. Oh, here. I don't even know why I was drawing it out.
Yeah.
I did normally. This is what
We can't really see it on here.
Okay, so central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, your peripheral nervous system. Okay, so and basically all the other parts of your nervous system are over here. So underneath that, okay, you've got two other nervous systems within your peripheral nervous system, autonomic and somatic. Okay, autonomic, so it's broken down further there. Autonomic makes you think of what word?
Automatic.
Automatic,
I didn't even think about that.
okay? And that is basically what it is. It's like your involuntary systems, nervous system. Somatic goes to your skeletal muscles, which we know are voluntary. And we just talked about muscles. From there, your autonomic system is again broken down into two more nervous systems.
The
Parasympathetic and sympathetic. We'll get into a lot more detail in those later on in the chapter, but I wanted you to at least have an idea of the structure, because sometimes when you start reading through here and you see all these different names, you're like, well, what is that? Okay. But if you'll kind of write this down and keep that on your brain or look at it when you're reading through, it'll make more sense because you'll see where it fits into the process. Parasympathetic and sympathetic are under autonomic. That's like your fight or flight and rest and digest nervous systems, like when you're under stress. So we'll talk about those more in detail later, but at least I want you to see how it's all structured. Very good. All right, so efferent nerves, somatic nervous system again is voluntary. We just talked about all this. Okay, let's keep going. Nervous tissues. So we've got two basic types of nervous tissue in here. Okay. First one is neuroglia. First one we're going to talk about. Neuroglia are basically like the support cells of your nervous system. So your neurons are actually the ones that carry the message. That's what we think of as kind of our brain cells, and that's what makes it work. But neuroglia are specialized cells that just support it and make it, they like aid your neurons to make them function the way that they need to. So first one on here, are, well, they're also called glial cells. You may have seen before a type of brain cancer, or at least I've seen this one called a glioblastoma. Okay, glia, that's where that glia comes. That's the, I think that's the tumor that Matt Jan had. All right, so let's look at these. So 4 types of these are on page 199 if you want to include a picture up close. Astrocytes, to me they kind of look like some kind of, I don't know, kind of like a star, like a, you want to think of it, it's kind of that greenish colored cell on there. So these are positioned between neurons and capillaries. Okay, so if they're positioned between neurons and capillaries, what do you think they would be for? Just think it through for a second. They do, they support. What do capillaries bring? What is a capillary?
It's in your lung.
There are capillaries in your lungs, but what is it?
is it
It's a tiny blood vessel, like so small that maybe only 1 or 2 blood cells can even fit through at a time. So if you think about these cells, they connect neurons to the capillaries. So they're bringing in oxygen, nutrients from the capillary and sending it over to the neuron. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so it says they're a link between neurons and capillaries for nutrients. They also help to control the chemical environment for protection. Our neurons need to be protected because, especially in our central nervous system, neurons don't generally come back, right? If you injure them, they don't. Now, there's a lot of research going on, and they're working on stem cell transplants and all kinds of stuff. But generally speaking, they don't come back. So once you injure those cells. Now, peripheral nerve, like nerves in your hands or your feet, those can a lot of times be repaired and grow back. They may not be as wonderful as they were before, but they can still function. brain and spinal cord, it's not that way. That's why brain and spinal cord injuries are so detrimental, because, you know, they don't just heal on their own and everything's good. There's usually some kind of lasting damage. Anyway, so these particular support cells, astrocytes, control the chemical environment for protection. And it says that they include almost half of all the nervous tissue, is just these astrocytes. Right. Let's see, microglia is the next one. Micro makes you think. Micro.
Small.
Small, right? There are smaller cells on here. Microglia absorb and dispose dead cells and bacteria. So they're kind of like, they're like the trash truck of the brain. Right?
Swiffer wet jet.
There you go, Swiffer. Microglia. Okay, ependymal cells. These line canals or cavities. Okay, kind of think epi, kind of like epithelial, want to think of it that way. Right, it lines. Things that they're protective covering around the spinal cord and the cavities that the brain sits in. Okay. And then the last one on here is the oligodendrocytes. I like that word. These make what's called myelin, which is a fatty tissue that actually wraps around neurons. We're going to talk about that more in just a second. Myelin is, I don't know, look at them on 199. See how it's attached to those little, well, see how they're attached to the neurons? They're attached to axons. Look where they actually are. That's the part of the neuron, that's that long part of the neuron. Each one of those little appendages that come off of those oligodendrocytes wraps around the axons of those neurons. So they're not just attached to the, when you're looking at this, their little limbs don't just stop right here. It actually, this whole attachment around this axon is part of this cell. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like has arms that wrap around it. And that part is called the myelin. Make sure. Myelin's not in here again, so let's talk about that. So myelin are made out of, well, there's another type. Hold on, I just got myself mixed up here. I'm losing my mind. Oh, yes. Okay. I'm like, what's going on? Because I was thinking swan cells, but those are different. These cells are found in the central nervous system. So the neurons are wrapped around. And what myelin does, and we'll talk about another myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system in a minute, but what myelin does is it makes those nervous impulses that travel along that neuron travel really fast. So basically, there's little bitty spaces actually between each one of these. And the way that a nervous impulse is carried along the path of this neuron is it actually bounces between each one of these. And that's what makes it go really, really fast. Okay? That's what it does. It just jumps. It basically jumps over the myelin. They like insulate the neuron. But there's some diseases that actually make that myelin like disintegrate and not work. And so it makes nervous impulses not travel the way that they need to. We'll talk about that. So in the peripheral nervous system, there's two other types of cells, support cells. So those other four that we've talked about, the oligodendrocytes, microglia, astrocytes,
Ependymal?
Ependymal, yes.
Oh.
Okay, so those four are all in the central nervous system. These two are in the peripheral nervous system. Swan cells, okay, do the same thing that basically the oligodendrocytes do, except they're their own cell. They create the myelin sheath on peripheral nervous system neurons. So each one of these, see it? These are swan cells. They make up the myelin sheath, that covering for the axon. Okay. And the nodes in between, these are the nodes that go in here. So it's same idea. when that nervous impulse travels, it just jumps between each one of those. Makes it go very fast. Everybody heard of multiple sclerosis? Heard of that disease? A long-term chronic disease. That's what happens in multiple sclerosis is that this myelin sheath is all broken down. And so when that nervous impulse tries to travel across, it just won't travel well. Like it just won't hardly make it through, and it can send off even like some, a lot of times you'll have like really jerky movements too, and that has to do with that not being a smooth travel of those nervous impulses. So, it's crazy to think about how things, you think, oh, you just have a disease. You don't always think about how it really, what it really does to the body and where it really affects it. So,
My friend has that.
do what?
My friend.
A lot of people get diagnosed young. There's a girl to school that's younger than me, really, that has it. So Schwann cells is what wraps around the axon. And I always think of a Schwann cell kind of like a Swiss roll. You know what I'm talking about? With Swiss roll, it like wraps around like a jelly roll, That's how they form and they wrap. I mean, they're like circular like that. You can't really see that on here. I didn't really show it. You can kind of see it on the next page, but not really good. And then satellite cells are on here too. They protect the cell body. They cushion and support as well. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the neuron. Okay, we know the basic shape of a neuron here. I know I skipped a few, but go back up to this where it says neurons in the different parts, dendrites, cell bodies, and axons. So I just wanted you to see this. This is kind of your standard neuron. When you think of a neuron, this is kind of what I always think it's shaped like. Okay, the cell body is this main part where the nucleus is. That's the cell body. Y'all remember looking at this on the microscope? We talked about tissues. It's like a purple one on one of the microscope slides we looked at. Yeah, so do you remember it? I really do. So the cell body is here. Okay, the dendrites, these are like fingers. We talked about dendrites. Think about it.
That's how I remember them, because I was like, they're like fingers.
Yeah, where they go cells and they take minutes.
Oh yeah, they're like.
Okay, so dendrites are kind of like these fingers, right? They actually pick up the message. And then axon, okay, is usually the longest portion, like a long, really long dendrite is kind of what it looks like. That's called the axon. And it actually takes the message away from the cell body to send it somewhere else. So these axon terminals, which is the end of the axons down here, they can be attached to a muscle, right, to tell it to contract. They can be attached to another neuron to send a message on. I don't know where else they can be attached to, but anyway, that's where they can be attached. Now, the dendrites could be attached to sensory receptors, right, like in your fingertips. Dendrites aren't always short, and axons aren't always long. Sometimes, like you may have some cells that have dendrites, like maybe the cell body is up in your spinal cord or around your spinal cord, but around it. And those dendrites are so long that it actually reaches to your fingertip. That one dendrite can do that. So it's not like you have a bunch of little bitty short cells that just like go up. Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, the cell body is at your spinal cord, and the axon reaches all the way down to the muscles in your hand. Or the dendrites start down here, and the cell body. That's how long one cell can be.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy? Yes, cool.
That's insane.
Do what?
So that's insane.
It is. It's pretty crazy. So that is, those are dendrite cell bodies, axons. A for axon, A for away from the cell body.
Okay.
So axon sends messages away from the cell body. Go back up. Sensory neurons, just like what we've talked about before, sends impulses towards the CNS. What's the other word for sensory neurons? Starts with A. Afferent.
I was just about to say that. But didn't we just say it?
Afferent, sensory neurons are your afferent pathways, right? Motor neurons, those are going to be your efferent, right? Motor, muscle, move, effort. Interneurons, inter means
In between.
between. So interneurons go between the two. Okay, makes sense. You just gotta think about it. Everybody good with those?
Yeah.
All right, these are different types of neuron structures that you can find. So bipolar means it has one axon, one dendrite. Kind of, I don't know why, this always makes me think of like Monsters, Inc. I feel like they look like they could be part of like the monsters on there. I don't know. So like Mike, you know, just kind of. So bipolar, think about it. It's got two ends, right? It's got two poles, basically. One dendrite, one axon. Unipolar means it only has one axon. I guess it only leaves the cell body in one place. Okay. So that one, and then multipolar means it's got dendrites coming out.
Well, yeah, that looks like them on Monster University where those guys have two heads and they're really, really long. Well, I just watched it last night, so.
Bro.
You're
Right.
I haven't watched
Spanish
Monsters
gonna be
Inc. in a
like
while, but I've watched
her
Monsters
bag
University.
for a while.
I just watched Monster University.
I like both
All right.
Whoa.
Awesome. We're done.
I'm so tired.
All right, so match these words. Sympathetic. Oh, we haven't learned those yet. I guess we need to talk about that. Parasympathetic versus sympathetic. Like I said, we'll get into more detail, I think, in section 4. Sympathetic is like your high alert system. That's your stress. I think sympathetic stress.
Yeah.
Sympathetic stress. Got lots of first letter memory things going on today.
Sympathetic.
Anyway, sympathetic and stress. That's your that's like whenever you get stressed or if you're doing exercise, that's what autonomic nervous system goes into effect. Right? What are some things that happen when you're stressed or you're exercising?
You turn red like Cody.
Turn red, right?
They
Sweat.
said it was
Makes
white,
your
dog.
capillaries, because you turn red,
Swell.
okay, makes your capillaries
Swell.
dilate. That's why your skin turns red. What'd you say?
My mom goes like,
Sweat.
"Woo!"
The sweat.
Okay. Temperature
Stand up,
goes
makes
up
noises.
because you're using your muscles.
Scream.
Scream.
Ice
Wait.
cream. Fries.
I swell up. Whenever I lift weights, I'll swell up
Yeah.
because your muscles really.
Because you get bigger, you know?
Yeah,
Well,
like I really
it's
swell up
blood.
though.
Give me your phone. That's
Yeah. Heart rate.
heart rate, blood pressure, all that goes up. That's part of that reaction, that autonomic reaction, your sympathetic nervous system. You get under
You get
stress,
everything
makes your heart
going.
pump, right? It wants you to send more oxygen to your brain so you can think quick.
Mhm.
Okay? Parasympathetic is the opposite of that. That's your rest and digest. So you're sitting, you don't have as much oxygen going to your brain. It's more going to this class is your rest and digest class, right? You gotta go with lunch. More blood is being shut into like your kidneys and your colon, trying to tell your body to digest your food, go to sleep like Cody is. Okay?
You don't have
So
enough
that's your
brain
sympathetic.
going to your oxygen.
Transmit, so that's the high alert. That's your sympathetic nervous system, okay? Which is part of the autonomic nervous system, which is part of your peripheral nervous system. Sympathetic is high alert. Okay. Number 2, transmits impulses away from the cell body. Axon.
Ooh.
A for axon, A for away. 3, fatty insulating material.
Myelin.
Glial.
Myelin.
Oh.
Good.
Glyle.
Myelin.
Oh, that wasn't even on one.
And then for the gap between the neurons, we
Synapse.
haven't talked about that either. I missed
I thought you did
that.
say
Something
Enters.
called a synapse. What that's talking about is, okay, so whenever you have 2 neurons or one neuron attached to a muscle, the axon, right, is sending the message. So at the axon terminal, and we know terminal means end, so the end of the axon, okay, right where it meets up with whatever it's going to send its message to. If that's another maybe it's the dendrites of another neuron, right? Maybe it's a muscle. There, it goes right up to it and then it stops. They don't ever actually touch. There's a little bitty gap in between called a synapse. We've talked about this before.
Oh yeah.
And that little gap is where neurotransmitters, we talked about neurotransmitters too, we talked about acetylcholine in the muscle. Yeah. So that's where a neurotransmitter jumps across into whatever it is that it's sending the message to.
Why don't they ever meet? Would it be harder?
I don't know if that would just make it like, not like electrocuted, I don't know.
Oh.
Not really, but.
Zap.
But you think it's electrical impulses that travel, you know, and those neurotransmitters are like little bitty hormones, kind of, that, what they call neurotransmitters, that send that message across. It's really cool. Medications sometimes can affect neurotransmitters, can either make it where they don't work, so they don't send a message. Like some pain medications will work on neurotransmitters so that the cells won't, basically they won't like accept the pain message. That's how some of them work. They have different ways of working, but pretty cool. So we'll actually talk about the transmission of nerve impulses on Tuesday next week. So we'll do that Tuesday next week. Thursday next week I will not be here, so I'm going to leave you guys a video to watch or a lecture to watch over the anatomy of the brain, which you need to make sure you take lots of notes on that chapter.
Oh my goodness.
Like,
Are you kidding me?
These are my notes.
so I should
Can
take
you
Not
leave
fall
us your
asleep
notes?
like you always do. Duh.
I don't ever fall
Take
asleep,
your
dog.
own. I'm going to talk about it.
Well, I
Then you
think
can
my
rewatch it.
own notes, but they're not ever really good.
So we'll talk about the parts of the brain next Thursday. I'll leave that lecture. You can always watch the lecture. Or take your read. All I did
Be
on here was
flexible.
I read the chapter and took notes over the chapter. That's all I do before I lecture with you guys. Unless I just have some kind of random knowledge, which happens sometimes about what we're studying. Mostly all I do to take notes is to take notes on what's
Monica's
already
at the
in
door.
here.
Who?
Monica.
So that's what we need to do.
Can I go get this?
No, I did not.
Can I run to Coach Monster and go get this packet, or I'm gonna get in trouble?
About 3 minutes later. Big Bird, I did not know you were pregnant. I made the claim and saw her so long.
And then I kind of turned it myself in here sometimes.
For a minute.
Cody, your girlfriend across the hall.
Ew.
So